Dragons are the heart and soul of the Game of Thrones universe. While the OG show only had 3 badass dragons birthed by Dany, House of the Dragon has no dearth of these magnificent fire-breathing beasts. So far, the prequel show has been pretty generous with fleshing out all the dragons, each with their own distinct looks and personalities. Watching these majestic mythical creatures digitally manifest straight out of our wildest imaginations has been nothing short of exhilarating. And as breathtaking as they are, dragons are also incredibly intimidating. With their tough, ancient scales, smoky nostrils, and razor-sharp fangs, they're House Targaryen's main protectors, for a reason. But as the Dance of the Dragons rages on with intense aggression, these beautiful air pups will start to go extinct. I think more than anything else in the prequel show, the death of Arrax and Meleys have been one of the most heart-wrenching scenes. Still, the more dragons you have on your side in this Targaryen civil war, the more power you hold to turn the tides of the war in your favor. Before anyone else could do this math, it was Prince Daemon Targaryen who said in Season 1's finale that Queen Rhaenyra's best chance at winning the war was to gather as many dragons as possible. Now, dragons were a relatively common sight in Westeros during the time of the dance, but there were only 2 dragons equally infamous for their wrath and fury. As of now, House of the Dragon has given us mind-blowing glimpses of how the Green faction face in battle once Aemond and Vhagar enter the scene. But there's still one particularly wild dragon who's not yet been introduced in the prequel show. I'm talking about Cannibal, the most terrifying beast in all of Westeros, who's not just untamable, but also has an acquired taste for his own kind. Now, in Fire and Blood, Cannibal was never a part of the dance, but still, people have often wondered if this dragon was what Rhaenyra needed to take out the Green faction's best chance right in the first fold of the war. But if the world's largest dragon were to dive into an all-ablaze battle with the world's nastiest one, who do you think would win? Well, without wasting another moment, let's discuss all the possible outcomes of a showdown between Vhagar and Cannibal. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Vhagar, the queen of all dragons. As the oldest and largest dragon in House of the Dragon, Vhagar is feared by every mortal in Westeros. Vhagar is the largest and unarguably the most powerful dragon alive. As the sister of Balerion the Black Dread, Vhagar is the only living dragon to have flown to Westeros with Aegon the Conqueror during the time of the dance. Named after one of the gods of Old Valyria, her first known rider was Queen Visenya Targaryen during Aegon's conquest. After that, she was ridden by Prince Baelon the Brave Targaryen, the late Lady Laena Velaryon, and finally by Prince Aemond One-Eye Targaryen. While her massive size is a contributing factor towards her intimidation, Vhagar's wrath is goddamn bitter, and anyone who's had to face her dragonfire never made it out alive. Take Lucerys Velaryon and his dragon Arrax for example. Aemond only wanted to scare him in the show, but Vhagar didn't obey her rider and took matters into her own hands by chopping down Arrax and Lucerys in half. She's also killed Meleys in a fight and even burnt Sunfire to a damaging extent, so we know that even if she was old, Vhagar is a battle-hardened queen. But what would be her pros and cons if she were to go up against a wild cannibal? Let's start with Vhagar's age and size. Now, Fire and Blood never spoke of the intricacies of Vhagar's design or size, but it was actually George R.R. Martin who clarified that she was a bronze dragon with greenish-blue highlights and bright green eyes. The VFX artist who brought her to life in House of the Dragon mentioned that she was nearly 500 feet huge, right from the tip of her nose to the end of her tail, and that's almost 150 meters. In the prequel show, Vhagar has a serpentine body that's typically covered in green scales with accents of yellow and bronze. Now, sure, there are a few rips in her wings, but still, Vhagar's wingspan is crazy and ranges from a solid 900 to 1,000 feet. Basically, when she fully takes flight, her width is almost 270 to 300 meters wide. It's said that Vhagar had gotten so big as the years went by that she couldn't fit into the dragon pit anymore. I think an example of that can be seen in the penultimate episode of Season 2, when Aemond rides a horse from the Red Keep to a forest where Vhagar had been resting. Typically, all dragons stayed with the dragon keepers in the dragon pit, but due to the dragon's sheer size, she was always seen resting somewhere unusual. Apart from that, even age plays a huge factor in a dragon's size, because the longer a dragon lives, the bigger it grows. Vhagar has been around for quite some time during the Targaryen Civil War, but she was actually hatched during the Century of Blood on Dragonstone in 52 BC. So that makes Vhagar almost 2 centuries old at 181 years. On top of her size, the old dragon's age almost makes her dragonfire more potent, which basically means the hotness of her breath can roast humans and burn younger dragons. I mean, Vhagar melted Aegon's battle armor into his body at Rook's Rest, and if the old queen wanted, she could have easily cooked the king from within. Plus, with age, Vhagar's skin and dragon scales have also gotten stronger and thicker, so if you think any other fire-breathing beast can just burn her green hide with their dragon breath or pierce through her scales with their teeth, well, sorry to disappoint you, it's gonna take much more to bring the queen down. While Vhagar was the smallest of the 3 dragons that helped King Aegon I conquer Westeros, she did outlive Meraxes and grew to be almost as large as Balerion, the largest Targaryen dragon alive. So this easily makes Vhagar one of the biggest dragons, possibly even bigger than the cannibal. Vhagar's speed and agility. Size is not the only factor when it comes to a dragon's strength. While Vhagar is a pro when it comes to fighting, her experience in the field certainly doesn't help with how her old age affects her mobility and reflexes. The older a dragon is, the larger it becomes, but it also tends to be slower than its younger counterparts. Every time Aemond has taken off with Vhagar, we've seen how she actually struggles a bit to take off and land, unlike other dragons like Syrax and Caraxes, who don't really make it look like a lot of work. The first time we see Vhagar's bitter fury, her lack of tolerance for bullshit, and her weak agility was in Season 1, when Arrax and Lucerys Velaryon were being chased by her. In an interview, George R.R. Martin actually mentioned that if the night hadn't been stormy, Arrax and Lucerys might have managed to outfly Vhagar, given that the former dragon was younger and significantly faster. Even in the 4th episode of Season 2 of House of the Dragon, titled Dance of Dragons, we see a fight between Meleys, Sunfire, and Vhagar. It's pretty obvious that while Meleys and Sunfire were fast and agile, with quick reflexes to counter an attack, Vhagar was actually quite slow in comparison. So, a dragon's speed and agility are very important factors in a battle. But even then, it's not as if anyone is taking the dragon for a race, and given how strong Vhagar is, smaller dragons usually tend to fly away from her. Vhagar's experience in the battlefield. There's a reason why Vhagar was so ferocious by the time of the Civil War. She's been through many crucial battles since the time of Aegon's conquest, and I think by the time of the dance, battles were like a hobby for her. Her journey on the battlefield began when Aegon the Conqueror landed on Westeros to begin his conquest with his sister wives Visenya and Rhaenys. During the initial stages of the conquest, Visenya flew Vhagar to Stokeworth, where the crossbowmen kept shooting bolts at the dragon until she set the castle's roofs on fire and turned it to ash. After Aegon's first coronation, Visenya, riding Vhagar, joined the Targaryen fleet led by Daemon Velaryon to capture Gulltown. During the Battle of Gulltown, the Arryn fleet defeated the Targaryen fleet by sinking a third of their ships and capturing many more. But eventually, Visenya swooped down on Vhagar and burned all of the Arryn fleet to secure the Targaryens a victory. As Aegon's conquest continued, Visenya flew Vhagar to Cracklaw Point to receive pledges of loyalty from all the local lords. After that, she flew Vhagar to Stony Sept to join her siblings, their dragons, and Aegon's army. They then advanced south, where all 3 dragons participated in the decisive Field of Fire, which was the only battle during Aegon's conquest where all 3 Targaryen dragons fought together. Vhagar, Meraxes, and Balerion killed 4,000 men, burning all of them alive. The battle ended with the death of King Mern IX Gardener, along with the end of House Gardener, allowing the Targaryens' army to emerge victorious. Visenya then flew Vhagar to the Trident in the Riverlands, where she joined her brother, husband, and sister, along with their dragons, to face Torrhen Stark, the king in the north. While Brandon Snow, Torrhen's bastard brother, offered to sneak into the Targaryen camp at night to kill the dragons, Torrhen refused. Instead, he sent his brother as an envoy and ultimately bent the knee to the Targaryens. Afterward, Visenya flew Vhagar back to the Vale and landed in the inner courtyard of the Eyrie. When Dowager Queen Shara Arryn arrived, she found her young son, King Ronald Arryn, sitting on Visenya's knee, gazing in awe at Vhagar and begging his mother for a ride on Vhagar's back. After Shara surrendered and bent the knee to Visenya, the queen took Ronald for a ride on Vhagar 3 times around the summit of the Giant's Lat. Later, when her sister Rhaenys and her dragon Meraxes died at Hellholt in Dorne, Queen Visenya and King Aegon retaliated by burning every Dornish stronghold at least once over 2 years. And this period became known as the Dragon's Wrath. Although the Dornish often tell a story that the Targaryens avoided attacking Sunspear because they feared Princess Merya Martell had acquired a special device from Lys to kill Vhagar and Balerion. However, Archmaester Timothy suggested that the Targaryens aimed to turn the other Dornish houses against the Martells, and so they strategically burnt down strongholds where the Martells held any form of influence. In 42 AC, Visenya's son, Maegor Targaryen, had claimed the crown of the Seven Kingdoms on Dragonstone. But when the Faith Militant at King's Landing continued to resist Maegor's reign, even after their defeats at the Battle of Stonebridge and the battle at the Great Fork of the Blackwater, Visenya mounted Vhagar and burned the homes of House Blaintree, House Terrick, House Deddings, House Leicester, and House Wayne in the Riverlands, all in one night. Meanwhile, Maegor flew Balerion to the Westerlands, setting fire to the seats of House Brum, House Doggett, House Folwell, House Lorch, House Myatt, and other pious lords who had defied his royal call. A year later, Maegor and Visenya then turned their attention to Old Town, threatening to burn down the Starry Sept in response to the High Septon's condemnation of the king's polygamous marriages. Luckily, the city was only spared from dragonfire because of the mysterious death of the High Septon, which allowed Lord Martin Hightower to open the gates before Balerion and Vhagar arrived to rain down fire on Old Town. After Visenya's death, Vhagar went unridden for almost 29 years, in most of that time on Dragonstone before moving to the Dragon Pit in King's Landing. In 73 AC, Prince Balon the Brave, having achieved knighthood, set out to follow his brother Prince Aemon and became a dragon rider by claiming Vhagar. A decade later, in 83 AC, during the Fourth Dornish War, Vhagar, along with Caraxes and Vermithor, helped burn the Dornish fleet that tried to invade the Stormlands. But Vhagar went riderless again when Prince Balon passed away in 101 AC. She didn't see war for a few decades until the Dance of the Dragon, when she was ridden by the one-eyed Prince Aemond in battle. Although this time, Vhagar fought other dragons instead of armies, and took out Arrax and Melis in the process. While Arrax didn't stand a chance against her, Melis could have done significant damage if she wasn't attacked with a combined assault from both Vhagar and Sunfire at Rook's Rest. Later, to fight his uncle who was gathering a huge army in the Riverlands, Aemond, riding on Vhagar, took the Green armies to fight Daemon Targaryen and Caraxes at Harrenhal. But when they arrived at the castle, Aemond realized that Daemon had already left to attack King's Landing, and was only playing a trick to lure Vhagar and Aemond away from King's Landing. So, in a fit of rage, he took Vhagar on a one-man war of revenge and devastated much of the Riverlands, starting with the complete destruction of Harrenhal's wooden structures. Vhagar's fiery rampage caused more damage than an entire army and severely impacted Rhaenyra supporters in the region. But Aemon's choice to abandon the Green Army under Criston was a strategic mistake, because without Vhagar's protection, Cole's army in the east was later surrounded and destroyed in the Butcher's Ball, leaving the eastern territories open to Rhaenyra's forces. Meanwhile, Aemond and Vhagar continued their reign of terror over the Riverlands, becoming a feared presence in the Trident. After the First Battle of Tumbleton, Daemon sent word that he and Caraxes would wait for Aemond and Vhagar at Harrenhal. On the 14th day of Daemon's vigil, Vhagar appeared in the sky, carrying Aemond and his lover, Alice Rivers. Aemond left Alice at the castle, and then both dragons and their riders took to the air. In the ensuing battle above the God's Eye, all four were killed. Caraxes' jaws closed around Vhagar's neck, allowing Daemon to leap from his dragon onto Vhagar and strike Aemond in the eye with Dark Sister, causing both the dragons to meet their ends by crashing into the lake. Most of the war strategies during the Dance of the Dragons was around Vhagar's competence in the battlefield. While the Blacks tried to think of solutions to avoid the horrid old bitch in battle, the Greens knew that flying Vhagar into every battle would easily help them turn the tides of the war in their favor. Cannibal the Wild. Dragons are tough to kill, as we evidently saw in Game of Thrones. But since there are so many dragons in this prequel, there might be a way to take down Vhagar, whether through the rider or the dragon itself. However, there's one type of dragon we've not seen on screen yet: the wild dragons. As the name suggests, wild dragons are those that have reached adulthood without ever bonding with a rider. They live independently in the wild, free from human commands and unwilling to form any kind of bonds with people. In Westeros, wild dragons are much rarer than the captive-bred dragons we're familiar with, as most Targaryen children bond with dragon hatchlings at a very young age, making the dragons more receptive to human bonds. But the exact reason why some dragons don't bond with humans and become wild is still a mystery. Even then, their existence is a good example of the fact that not all dragons are meant to be ridden. The attempt to tame and ride these wild dragons has been an important storyline in George R.R. Martin's Fire and Blood, and we'll probably see them soon in House of the Dragon, given how the show has consistently teased the existence of Sheepstealer in the Vale. So, at the beginning of the Dance of the Dragons, 3 wild dragons roamed around Dragonstone: Sheepstealer, Grey Ghost, and Cannibal. While Sheepstealer earned his name because he loved mutton and often stole sheep from Dragonstone to Driftmark, Grey Ghost was a small, slender dragon with grey-white skin that allowed him to blend into the clouds and mist. But Cannibal was the fiercest wild dragon in all of Westeros, and like Balerion the Black Dread, he was a large dragon with black scales and green eyes. Now, dragons are generally hostile creatures, but the cannibal was a different beast altogether. While his aggression toward humans was understandable because of his wild nature, what sets him apart from other dragons was his gruesome behavior, as he was known to consume his own kind. The cannibal devoured dead dragons, stalked younger ones, and even feasted on newborn dragon babies and dragon eggs. Even during the Red Sowing, most of the dragon seeds dared not to visit Cannibal's lair, but the fools who did never came back to tell the tale, as the wild dragons turned them into ash and bones in mere seconds. Cannibals Age. Cannibal is said to be the oldest and largest of the wild dragons. He was famous for his hostility toward the Targaryen dragons, but no one knows the exact reason behind it. Although some locals and small folk on Dragonstone claim that the cannibal was on the island even before the Targaryens arrived in 114 BC, it is possible that the cannibal comes from a different bloodline of dragons, which might explain his inherent aggression toward the Targaryen dragons. But there's always been a debate about Cannibals Age. While he's described as the oldest and largest of the wild dragons living on Dragonstone, that still sounds pretty vague. Because really, how old is oldest and how large is largest? We can't know for sure, but we can make some educated guesses. Now, we may not know the exact ages of all the wild dragons on Dragonstone, but we do have a rough idea about Sheepstealer, the second largest wild dragon after the cannibal. He's said to have been born when King Jaehaerys I, also known as the Conciliator, was still young. So by the time the Dance of the Dragons begins, Sheepstealer had been on Dragonstone for 70 to 80 years, making the cannibal who's older, closer to a century old at the very least. The cannibal is also older than Vermithor, who was born shortly after Jaehaerys himself, and is also older than Dreamfire, who was born about half a decade before Jaehaerys. Some assume that the cannibal could be around the same age as Quicksilver, the hatchling of King Aenys Targaryen. But again, many believe he's even older than that, possibly arriving on Dragonstone before the Targaryens did. This belief, held by the smallfolk and fishermen of Dragonstone, explains the cannibal's feeding habits and suggests he might be older than all the Targaryen dragons born after Aegon's conquest. However, we're not very sure about his age before the conquest, because if he were to be that old, he should be much larger than what Fire and Blood describes him to be. As I've mentioned before, dragons don't stop growing until they're near the end of their lives. Balerion himself kept growing until a year before he passed away. Despite becoming slow and lazy in his later years, the dude's size simply kept growing, and no dragon has ever reached the extent of his size or age, not even Vhagar. Balerion came to Westeros from Valyria as a young dragon, and spent 208 years in the world. At the time of her passing, Vhagar was about 3 decades shy of that number, but was still only as large as Balerion was at the time of the conquest. So if the cannibal were older than Vhagar, he should have been the largest dragon in existence during the Dance of the Dragons. Yet, that title repeatedly goes to Vhagar. While it is possible the sources of Fire and Blood were biased, it's highly unlikely they'd lie about dragon sizes, which could be easily observed and recorded by others. So in a way, the small folk of Dragonstone are correct in saying the cannibal is older than Targaryen dragons, but it's possible that he's only older than those born after the conquest. So if he were older than Balerion and Vhagar, we'd be able to tell, because older dragons need a lot of encouragement to move. Yet the cannibal is described as a vicious, ill-tempered creature that's as active as any other wild dragon on Dragonstone. His black coloring might remind people of Balerion, but his menacing green eyes make us think of wildfire instead of dragonfire. It's difficult to determine his breed, but based on his behavior at the start of the dance, Cannibal was most probably a war-type dragon, which is why both sides in the dance would have wanted to secure him for his ferocity and sheer size. Cannibals Size. Now, we're never explicitly told just how large the cannibal is, but considering the inevitable fact that he is bigger than Sheepstealer, we can safely assume he is at least the third biggest dragon in House of the Dragon, if not the second. The confusion arises simply because both Vhagar and Vermithor are vying for the top spot when it comes to size. As mentioned in Fire and Blood, Vermithor, who was known as the Bronze Fury, had quickly caught up to Vhagar in size, even if he was born about 7 to 8 decades after Vhagar. Even then, by the time of the dance, Vermithor was already larger than Dreamfire, who was born around the same time as him. This is likely due to Vermithor's breed, which seems to be that of a war-type dragon, making him larger than the slender Dreamfire and the skinny Sheepstealer, despite their similar ages. The cannibal is confirmed to be larger than Sheepstealer, so if Dreamfire and Sheepstealer are roughly the same size, which they should be, then considering his age, the cannibal is likely as big as Vermithor, even if people keep saying Cannibal and Vhagar are of the same build. Fire and Blood tells us that Vermithor was massive even as a young dragon, with only Balerion and Vhagar being bigger than him by 48 AC. Like I've said before, dragons keep growing as long as they have the freedom to do so, and right now, the Greens have the largest dragon in existence. With Hugh Hammer claiming Vermithor for the Black faction, Queen Rhaenyra finally has a dragon in her army who's capable of matching Vhagar in battle. Although technically, Meleys was half the size of Vhagar, and keeping that in mind, Vermithor should be at least 2/3 of Vhagar's size, if not closer. But if we keep the usual correlation of the growth and age factor when considering the size of all dragons in Westeros, the one that should be closest to Vhagar's size is undoubtedly the cannibal. Like we've discussed, The Cannibal is much older than both Vermithor and Sheepstealer, the next two largest dragons from a size and age perspective. So, if I'm correct about him being a war-type dragon, there's no doubt that the Cannibal is bigger than both of them. He might even be Vhagar's equal, because war-type dragons usually tend to outgrow speed-type dragons, given they're often described as being huge and heavy as opposed to nimble and slender. Cannibal speed and agility. Unfortunately, we don't have a solid physical description of the Cannibal, and given that we've not seen him in House of the Dragon yet, I can't really tell whether he's a speed type or a war type dragon. But if we keep the parameters of his size and age in mind, it's possible that the Dragon Eater isn't as fast as the other wild dragons, even if he is stronger and bigger than them. If he's really as old as Fire and Blood believes him to be, Cannibal might struggle to be as swift as the younger dragons, just like Vhagar, but given that he's a wild dragon with a different diet as compared to the rest of the dragons in Westeros, I think the Cannibal would be just as fast as Vermithor is, even if he's not agile enough to outfly Sheepstealer and Grey Ghost in a race. Now, wild dragons enjoy more freedom as compared to the others, who usually remain secluded in the dragon pits and only get to leave when their riders take them out for a flight. Wild dragons, on the other hand, roam about more freely, hunt their own food and make their own lairs without being structured by anyone in a restricted environment. Essentially, even if Vermithor was a few years younger than Sheepstealer, it's more than plausible for the wild dragon to be faster than him. And considering that, Cannibal has been a wild dragon for over a century or more, plus he survived all these years feasting on dragons, which really doesn't make it impossible for the Cannibal to be as fast as Vermithor. So that means even if he's not as fast or agile as the other wild dragons or younger dragons of the realm, Cannibal is still more efficient than Vhagar when it comes to mobility. Cannibal's experience in the battlefield. Given that the Cannibal is a hardcore wild dragon, he's definitely never taken part in any of the human wars. Aegon's conquest is literally one of the biggest events in Westerosi history, and if a black dragon other than Balerion had even a tiny role to play in the conquest, we definitely know. Cannibal has always kept himself far away from the human drama and their power struggle. Because he's never been claimed, there are not many records of his interaction with any human being, except for one during the Red Sowing when Prince Jacaerys called for the Targaryen bastards to claim all the riderless dragons during the Dance of the Dragons. Of course, some stupid dragon seeders tried to mount Cannibal only to meet his fiery wrath and turn to dust. But there was one isolated incident where a man named Silver Dennis tried to claim Sheepstealer during the sowing, but the dragon retaliated by tearing his arm off and flying away. When Dennis's sons arrived at the scene to stop the bleeding and examine his wound, the Cannibal came out of nowhere to devour Silver Dennis and his sons. Nonetheless, if he were to be claimed, the Cannibal would instantly shift the balance of power in favor of whoever rode him. While the Blacks do have the upper hand at the moment after getting Silverwing and Vermithor on their side, adding on Cannibal would actually give them the power to carry on a war like Aegon's conquest. Conversely, if the Greens somehow got their hands on the Cannibal, all hopes of countering Vhagar would be dashed for the Blacks, because then they'd have two massive dragons to worry about. While the Cannibal is definitely one of the strongest wild dragons, he'd surely never accept a human rider. In Fire and Blood, Cannibal just disappeared after the Dance of the Dragons, and because he had no part in the Civil War, the Cannibal was one of the few dragons to survive the conflict, which is really quite an achievement. This wild dragon was never ridden by any man in Westeros, making his potential appearance in the series all the more exciting. Plus, I do get it that he has no battle experience, but you should probably keep in mind that this guy had hunted dragons for over 100 years, so even if he might not be as structured as the other dragons, Cannibal can still do significant damage, given that he would inevitably fight dirty. Vhagar vs Cannibal. Who would really win in a fight? If this battle between Vhagar and Cannibal were to happen, it'd be an incredibly close neck-to-neck affair, since both dragons are similarly powerful in their own might. The Cannibal is the largest wild dragon, while Vhagar is the largest dragon alive. Even though Cannibal survives the war's end, the Queen of Dragon, although dead, went out in full glory after a highly intense combat. Now, if Cannibal had a rider to guide him, he could definitely pose a serious threat to Vhagar. Despite his cannibalistic habits potentially stunting his growth, the fact that he's remained unclaimed and unharmed for so long is really all the evidence you need of his power. So, with the right rider and circumstances, the Cannibal could challenge the biggest dragon in the world without seeming out of place. And if he really is older than Vhagar, it'd mean his skin and hide are inevitably stronger. Suppose if Vhagar even chomps Cannibal down like she did with Arax, the Queen of Dragons won't be able to do much damage. To top that off, Cannibal's age would also make his dragonfire more potent, so hitting Vhagar with his wildfire like dragon breath on full blast might affect her more than we can imagine. But again, when talking about Vhagar, the green dragon has an upper hand when it comes to battle experience and size. While mobility really doesn't matter in this case, reflexes surely do. Something tells me Vhagar will have better reflexes in a dragon fight as compared to Cannibal, possibly landing strategic attacks under the guidance of his rider. The Dragon Eater has never fought a battle, let alone gone one-on-one with one of the great dragons with a 181-year-long experience in the battlefield. And while he would absolutely fight dirty and unhinged, the Cannibal wouldn't be very strategic or structured in a fight. So, if I had to choose, I'd say the Cannibal would likely lose to Vhagar. Being a wild dragon, the Cannibal would surely fight in an uncontrolled manner. Even if he'd put up a good fight against Vhagar, the Green Queen would eventually take him down after a grueling duel. Now, let's consider another scenario where both the dragons would be fighting solo, without any rider to steer them. Vhagar's never fought anything without the guidance of her rider, and in this matter, Cannibal might have the upper hand if luck were to favor him. The wild dragon has had the experience of killing dragons for food, so inevitably he'll view Vhagar as dinner and apply the same tactics on her as a predator does its prey. Given that we know Cannibal will inevitably fight dirty, possibly tiring out Vhagar till he can make the final move, all he needs is one right moment to have at her neck with his jaws. If Caraxes could have such a strong impact by attacking Vhagar's loose neck, just imagine what the Cannibal's jaw might do to her. If Vhagar fights dirty, maybe she might be able to gain the upper hand. Still, it's very much possible that without a rider, both Vhagar and Cannibal would fight each other to death. However, it's really quite unfortunate that we'll not be seeing the Cannibal in action during the Targaryen Civil War. According to the Fire and Blood, the Cannibal vanished from Dragonstone sometime after the Dance of the Dragons, and no one knows where he went. But it is possible that he went back to Valyria, since that's where all the dragons came from, or perhaps Asshai, which is said to be the true point of origin for these fire-breathing beasts. While that is a mystery, I do know that after the Cannibal disappeared, dragons simply vanished from the Dragonmont altogether, and ever since he left, all the Targaryen dragon eggs just stopped hatching. It's possible that the Cannibal abandoned Dragonstone because of this very reason. Although every generation of Targaryens after the dance was presented with a dragon's egg in their cradles, none of them hatched, as they'd all become fossilized. If this happened at Dragonstone too, then the Cannibal had just lost his source of unlimited food supply. After his main source of food was extinct, there was no point for him to hang out in Dragonstone or Westeros, so the only places where he could hope to find dragons were Valyria and Asshai. So it's very likely that's where he went. And regardless, it's a shame we'll never see him fight another dragon, because witnessing those black and green flames in action on screen at least once would have been truly incredible. Even then, he has nothing on our old Green Queen Vhagar, who would have to fight tooth and nail to take down the Dragon Eater, but she still managed to end him. Now that we've discussed all the possibilities and outcomes from a battle between Vhagar and Cannibal, what do you guys think? Will Vhagar be able to defeat Cannibal in a fight? Let us know about your thoughts and theories in the comment box below. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone.